Welcome, everyone, including all of our ISM members and our guests to our program today, which is hosted by ISM New Jersey. And I'm Kathy Perna, the Executive Director. Today, our speakers will be discussing unlocking the potential of supplier diversity and inclusion in the U.S. and Europe, which I find this topic very fascinating. We would like to hear from you today, so please be sure to put any of your comments or questions for Lisa and Andrea in the chat. I will now turn our program over to first Lisa Westgate, who is the principal of LN Westgate LLC, and Andrea Fimian, the CEO and founder of Fips Consulting, who will give a short intro before diving into our topic. Take it away, Lisa.
Thank you, Kathy. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. And Kathy, thank you for the invitation. So my name is Lisa Westgate, and I am, as Kathy said, the founder of LN Westgate. I'm a consulting firm that manages and oversees supplier diversity, procurement, and DEI programs that support large businesses working with small businesses. I have well over 2 decades of experience in procurement and supplier diversity. First heard about supplier diversity in 2004, and it really compelled me to work within this industry. Very excited to dive into this today. So you're going to hear a lot more from me. So I'm going to hand over to Andrea so that we can get started.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And thanks also from my side to Katie for having us and to have the opportunity to talk about supplier diversity in the US and in Europe. So my background is actually corporate. I was in corporate for almost also 2 decades and was in supply chain and was also leading the supplier diversity and inclusion program for EMEA for several years, and also the global second-tier program, where I realized this is not really something that's very much known in Europe. So I'm located in Switzerland, and that's why I thought, why not just start my own supply chain consulting firm specialized in supplier diversity and inclusion, especially in Europe, where corporates are only starting to look at this topic.
So thank you, Andrea. So as we dive in today, I think where we'd like to start is really jumping in and talking about the essentials of transforming a US-centric supplier diversity program into what we hope will be a global powerhouse. Andrea, do you want to kind of start us off with talking a little bit about what you're seeing over in Europe as it kind of contradicts or maybe is being supported by the US?
Yes, thank you so much, Lisa. So what I also forgot to mention when I introduced myself is I have a podcast on supplier diversity and inclusion, and it's really more focused on Europe than the US. And also I started some learning and sharing sessions that you can find on my website, which is in the chat, or which will also be shared by Katie after the sessions with the recording. So what's really different in Europe is it's not a copy paste. So you can not just take your US program and put it into Europe and think it works. First of all, Europe has over 50 countries. So it's not just one country. It has over 100 languages. It has different cultures and also different legislations, different data privacy laws, and so on. So it all has to be taken into account. But the first big difference is that there is no legislation for supplier diversity and inclusion. So there is no need for companies or corporates, or no requirement to actually look at their supply chain and include diverse businesses in their supply chain.
And Andrea, I think that's a really interesting point, one that you and I have spoken about before, right? What we know is that historically, if we were to look back and maybe in the US, contemplate implementing supplier diversity as an aggregate program again, would we do it the same way? And I'm compelled to say that we would probably not do it the same way, right? What we did is we built out a compliance-based initiative that seemed to be a check the box, different from actually procurement. And one of the things as a procurement practitioner that I believe in is the idea and the understanding that we need to diversify our supply chains in order to solve for X, right? And I think when we talk about what are we solving for, what is X equal? Well, X is where we have individualized programs across different corporations. But how we think about it, we have to shift our 1965, right? The first time we started talking and seeing supplier diversity entering the US, right? How do we shift the narrative on that? And how do we talk about it so that what we're looking for with our programs is actually looking for innovation, looking for resiliency, looking towards small businesses and diverse businesses to bring simplified, it's a funny word I'm choosing, but simplified approaches, right, to increasing the supply chain so that we're getting ourselves out of some of the complications that we saw leading up to and absolutely during and post-COVID, right? So I'd like to ask you, I guess, where and how are you seeing some of the different countries giving consideration to what's happened here in the United States, some of the pushback and some of the compliance initiatives? Where are you seeing that being considered and thought differently?
Well, I think you mentioned a good point, COVID. And at that point, when there were issues with delivery or supply chain issues with delivering PPE, whatever, gloves, antibacterial masks, everything, it was a big, I would say, a big point in time where companies realized that supply chain is crucial for running their business. Where also a lot of companies, and it happened to be during the same time where Black Lives Matter picked up again in the US, and that kind of moved also into the UK. So in the UK, it's much more known and much more developed, looking into your supply chain and include diverse owned businesses than in other parts of Europe. So also, if you look at organizations and agencies that certify diverse owned businesses, there aren't so many. So that's another point where it's different to the US. It's not that you have all these different organizations that certify diverse businesses. So that's also a huge challenge here, and that's connected with visibility and people knowing about it, and also, but this culture of diverse businesses to step out and stand out and say, yes, I am maybe, this, my company is owned by people with disabilities, but I don't want to, get that certification or mark myself as such. And I think so there are different things that play into it, but I think, the really what you ask or what your point was, it's really something that started in the UK and now is also getting into other countries in Europe. And as you said, it's about building that resiliency, having a resilient supply chain, making sure that you get your products and services delivered on time to your clients, which also played into looking at your suppliers and also the innovation. That's obviously also another part, but also in Europe, ESG is very, very big. So environmental, social governance, with all the reporting that's going on that companies have to do starting this year, they also have to look at their supply chain, because in the supply chain, you have 50 to 90% of your CO2 emissions coming from for your company, depending on what kind of business you have. So it's all playing into that, and that's why it's not just really focused only on supplier diversity and ownership and control of a company, but also into what's the meaning of the business. So how are they spending their money as well? How are they set up? What's their cause? What kind of impact do they achieve? You're on mute. I can't hear you.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I don't know how that happened. Sorry about that. No, I was just jumping on. I love the fact that when we think about the why, right? It's one of my favorite questions to ask a client. why do you want to do this? What do you want out of a supplier diversity program, right? And there's a few things, right? There's the answer, you know, and I think about it in a kind of a good, better, best methodology.
Yeah.
What's good? Well, that's compliance based, right? I have a contract, I have a customer, they're demanding X. Okay, they're demanding X, you need to solve for X, right? But that's just going to get you to that good status. And it's again, I'm going to point back to, we poorly implemented supplier diversity as a nation here in the United States, right? Starting back in 1965. We didn't think the whole process through. We thought about it through an individual lens. When we think about it today and we think we want to move from compliance, we want to get to that better methodology, what's included in that better methodology, right? And for me, I think that's when we're thinking about why. What is your, so I had a client who asked me, they were looking for their supply base to align with what their customer base looked like, right? That's really DEI initiative, but followed with innovation and resiliency, right? Which is where we're going to pick up that best methodology.
Right.
So when we go back to the good, how do we align? We are hearing now customers want supply base. They want companies to look like their community. They want their supply base to look like community, right? How do we do that in a method that's easy-ish, right? For the category managers, right? This is a category manager burden. This is about build out the strategy of why at that CPO level. But really, you need to be drilling that down into that category manager level so that when they're looking at initiating what their supply base looks like, they're taking that strategy, that leadership strategy, that leadership requirement that's based on compliance, based on customer requests, they're effectively adding that into their strategy. Right. And I think that's when, you know, when you and I have known each other for some time now, right? And when we talk about the differences that are happening in the US and Europe, and we talk about sustainability, right? Because we both have answers for sustainability, though we today is about supplier diversity. What we're seeing from Europe in the requirement you had mentioned for this year in CO2 emissions, I almost said CEO emissions, CO2 emissions, right? It's in there that here, once again, burden is falling to US companies. How are you preparing? Because there's been a lot of chatter. We've had years of chatter around this. How are you responding to these requirements? And again, we're going to start with that good, better, best methodology. How are you getting that simplified answer? And then rolling it up to your next level until ultimately it's part of your organization, part of what drives your procurement team.
Totally. Yeah.
We can go on and on about that one.
I know. We always have to like cut our calls because we keep going and going. But I think, you know, it's totally right what you were saying. It's with the procurement managers and category managers, but most companies do have their supplier diversity teams, their supplier diversity champions and managers. But at the end of the day, it's all of procurement, and it's not just procurement, but it's the whole company that needs to support, because as we know, purchasing decisions are not always made by procurement. And also, you know, you have your stakeholders. They need to understand that supplier diversity is part of your strategy, of your company strategy. It needs to get supported by the CEO and communicated down. Communication and training, learning internally is key to run a successful program.
Absolutely. Something you had addressed earlier was really around certifications, right? And this is one of my favorite topics. And the reason it's one of my favorite is we have certifying agencies, right? Of which companies pay into in order to be able to obtain information.
Right.
The small diverse businesses pay into in order to become part of, right? I just want to highlight for the people here in the US, you know, state government, state government, most states have supplier diversity offices. And why I think that's important is if part of your why, part of your we want to include small businesses in our supply chain because we recognize that 65% of the people that work in the United States work for small businesses. We recognize that we want our supply base to look like our customer base, right? All of those whys. Somewhere in the whys, hopefully we simply want to open or relieve burdens for small businesses to do business with us, a large business. And I bring up the certification from this perspective in bringing forward state governments and their supplier diversity offices for this point.
Right.
In order to obtain a certification through a state, I'm from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We have a leading supplier diversity office here in Mass, but there are in almost every state, there is a supplier diversity office. And what they do is they do all of the vetting and they do all of the processing and they have all of the supplier information at the state level. It alleviates a significant amount of the burden of certification onto a small business, cost and efforts. So I bring that up because it's also a free and accessible means to access small business through your own state government. Andrea, when you first started, I think we're going back to the earlier part, when you were talking about certifications and you were starting in the UK, what are the certifying agencies looking like in Europe? What can we hope for coming up? Well, like what's the trends that we can hope for?
Well, I think the easiest to be identified underrepresented group is women. So there is an equivalent of WeBank, which is We Connect International. It's like the global organization. All women-owned businesses outside of the US can sign up to We Connect International, get certified. Then we do have a kind of an equivalent to NGLCC, which is the European Gay and Lesbian LGBT plus business chamber. They have different partners in Benelux, so Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Italy, Spain, France, also Germany, covering most of Europe. So it's like the European head organization with all the different partners. Also, Out Britain is partnering with EGLCC. Then there is MSD UK, which I mentioned before. This is kind of the NMSDC in the UK, where ethnic minority owned businesses can get certified. And MSD UK, speaking of ethnic minorities, it is a challenge, a huge challenge in Europe, because you cannot just apply ethnic minority definition to any other country or every country in Europe. So every country has different laws and ways how they define ethnic minorities. And that's why it was, or it is still a huge challenge for MSD UK to expand to other countries. They started now with the European Supplier Diversity Project, which is ESDP, looking at more countries like Germany and France, Netherlands, where there's a huge demand from the corporates who have business there. And then I also there is a presence of Disability In, who is also expanding into Europe. And speaking of Disability In, I just had Philip de Vlieger from Disability In on my podcast, which this episode is being published tomorrow. So yeah, so these are the certification agencies, but let's say that what we can learn from the US is to look also at 50-50 or 100% diverse owned businesses, but they don't fit into the 51%, let's say, owned by a woman. if it's a business that's owned 50% by a woman and maybe 50% by an LGBTIQ person. So that's the gap that we are aware of, but it's also hard to, and a huge challenge to find a way to have a certification for that. So there is a gap there as well, but also looking at, you know, for example, LGBT individuals in certain countries in Europe where it's not very well seen to come out as an LGBT person. So that's also a huge challenge, which you need to take into consideration when you want to do or roll out your supplier diversity program in Europe. And what I also wanted to mention, you said before that SMEs are, I think 65 or something percent of the US. In Europe, it's actually 99% of all the companies are SMEs based on the EU definition for SMEs. So it's really also supporting the small and medium-sized businesses, which is the backbone of the economy when you work with smaller and medium-sized businesses. So yeah, that's
yeah, no, that's I'm with you on that. I think that the drive for small business, or the idea that we would overlook, you know, I recently wrote a paper that talked about the differences of if we could go back 10 years here in the US and consider our economy and think about doing business as a person with Amazon, with Walmart, and I'm not disparaging either of those organizations, but if your home procures goods for your home 100% from Amazon and Walmart, and you then turn to Main Street and say, I don't understand where Main Street went, that is by essence the same. It's the same direction that we're talking about here, right? We're really talking about how do we ensure that small businesses are able to have some long-lasting efforts here in the US, there in Europe. And I think to do that is really to ensure that large businesses are opening in an equitable manner. And I want to really talk a little bit about what equitable manner means for a moment. I have a client who had an issue with small businesses. They had a small business day, and each small business not each, that was too big. There was an amount of small businesses that would come in and say, I do X and here's my certification. That's not a pitch, right? That's not a pitch for a small business. It's not a pitch for a large business. Sales is sales, procurement is procurement, right? Those two functions still need to happen collaboratively, right? Because sales and procurement is a collaboration as much as it's adversarial, it's still a collaboration, right? Salespeople need to come in and offer a value proposition, and they have to be able to define. And that's part of the message when, and I know for both of us, when we work with clients who are looking for assistance in developing small businesses, right? That's, you know, I used to have this line that said, if you can't find a diverse business to do X, help build it, right? It's that simple. Help build it. How do you help develop it? What's the reason? What's the point of entry that isn't allowing an opening for small businesses? Same respect. Maybe it's as simple as an organization kind of offering a sales pitch day. Here's how you pitch our organization, right? We want to see your capability statement. We want to talk about these 17 different things, whatever the number is. We want to talk about them. We want to address them, and we want to move forward. Because if you're not demanding the same requirements from a large business as you would a small business, you're going to run into some problems there in regards to what the actual outcome is. And it's the same on the flip side. If you're a small business and you're not matching the fair and equitable expectations of a business, you're not going to be winning some of that work and getting that. And my last point on this one is, are the requirements fair and equitable, right? you, I know, Andrea, I can go on and on about this one, and I'm just going to leave it with, are you asking a small business to perform 2 hours worth of work in order to get onto your supply base, to then go into an abyss that you're never looking at, right? And that's some of the things that I think as part of bringing in a supplier diversity consultant. This isn't a sales pitch to anybody, but right, giving the direction and attention to what's required in order to move forward with the expectations and goals of a supply diversity program based on your why. And now I won't talk about that anymore.
No, I totally agree, but I also think, you know, it's both sides, right? So I'm not just pointing fingers at small businesses or at corporates. It's both sides. I think corporates need to look at where they implement supplier diversity. What are the also, how does the landscape look like in regards to diverse businesses that they can potentially work with for these opportunities? And if there is no opportunity or no diverse business, think about, you know, what else can we do? Can we do either change our strategy or look at tier 2, which is also something which I think is used not enough in our region. But as I said, we're only starting off with tier 1 supplier diversity. So, you know, just to give you an example, I have a friend, she works in a company with several hundred employees, and they have, you know, over, I would say about 80% or 60% of their client base is female. And they have a board of 9 people, but only 1 is a female. So that's where it all starts. And that's where we kind of still are in Europe, with making sure there is equal payment. You know, not the case everywhere. I just heard something on the radio this morning where somebody went to court because she got 20% less than her male counterpart. So it's still, I was at an event where they talked about diversity and inclusion, and they were like, oh yeah, we just created this business resource group. So this is this is the level where we're at, and where companies, especially I would say smaller companies and local European companies, are at. And US companies, they realized, oh, supplier diversity, it can help us generate revenue as well. It can help us get good talents, because as we know, the young generation, they're looking at what is my future employer doing in regards to diversity and inclusion. So they see all the advantages, whereas we're still kind of at making sure we have diverse talents and diverse teams. But I'm really, or not just me, right, but the group of supplier diversity enthusiasts in Europe are trying to raise the flag and say, hey, have you ever heard of supply chain diversity and inclusion? Because this is how you have to sometimes call it, so people understand what's going on or where it fits. And then yeah, it's a whole different conversation where it starts. But what I also wanted to mention is, it's not just about what I said before. It's not just about underrepresented groups and creating more equality with buying from diverse owned businesses, but also with including, for example, social enterprises into your supply chain, where it's, you know, you also have, I just talked to the guy from Telos, which is the European organization from Social Enterprise UK. And they said, you know, we created about 3,200 jobs with the Buy Social Corporate Challenge, where they had several corporates confirming or saying that they want to spend so and so much millions of pounds with social enterprises. And through that, they created about 3,200 jobs for people who not normally have the opportunities to get a job. So that's the main point, right? For people who might have been in prison or just Yeah, so that's the thing that
Interesting.
I also wanted to add here.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you were sharing right there, I was thinking to myself, there is a push to there's a push to remove DEI from the vocabulary of supplier diversity, right? And and again, part of my offerings is DEI training, so which is a very HR perspective. But when I talk about procurement and I talk about supplier diversity, I truly don't believe that it is about DEI. That might come down to the personal reason as to why some members of a steering committee, a supplier diversity steering committee, might be attempting to drive supplier diversity in a specific way, right? And you had pointed out earlier about Black Lives Matter, and one of the things that we saw after George Floyd's death was this push for how do we increase the amount of business that we do, and the question came two different ways. Localized, right? So companies were starting to say, how do we look local, and how do we identify African-American businesses in order to increase our spend and increase the initiative for underutilized businesses, right, in particular locations. That was an interesting and compelling initiative that we saw from many clients. And I was surprised by that one, quite honest. I mean, I've seen a lot of things over the years, but I was surprised by that one. And I thought, well, here's a perfect example of how business responds to what's happening in the world today, right? Because there has to be a connection. We are individuals that go to work every day and we perform functions to support businesses, but we're still human beings who start that, right? So how do we take into consideration some of that? When I'm talking about supplier diversity programs, in some respects, I always attempt to put my blinders on as it relates to procurement. And why I say this and why I'm really adamant about it is that we can't make decisions based on, we procurement practitioners cannot decide for suppliers that cannot perform, but we need to be able to identify what that means. And I think this is where vendor scorecarding, CSAT reports, right, stakeholder reporting is really important. One of the messages, Andrea, I'm going to talk for both of us, we hear this all the time. I can't move this function to a diverse business because they won't perform at the same level. And I'm always taken a little back by that, because the statement is, you brought me in to help you find a supplier to replace the supplier you haven't. You're actually unhappy with that supplier. You're not clear, you haven't identified with data as to why you're unhappy. But you're now casting this big brushstroke that says, I can't do business with any diverse business because they're not going to be at the level. Until we start having data answers, right? And there's plenty of data out there in the world. There's plenty of data out there in the world to help support selection. What has to happen internally is a data mining. Are we collecting, from a procurement perspective, are we collecting information on incumbent suppliers, regardless of diversity? And that's really the key here, right? It is about ensuring that procurement is working on nothing but data and driving that initiative. And the fact that they are diverse or not diverse, it becomes secondary. But adding them to that initial step, helping small diverse businesses get through the door and get a seat at the table to present, that's really what we're talking about here when we talk about supplier diversity, right? That discovery, that development, and that retention. And in some respects, that's really what a good program comes down to. Are you able to then capture all of that ancillary stuff that's so vital to the business? Are you bringing resiliency in? Are you looking at innovation? Are you getting from your suppliers that level of product and service that you should be demanding? I just wanted to jump on that a little bit, because DEI is it's 3 letters that are having a different type of impact here in the United States. And, you know, I'm going to give a by golly here. By golly, I'm just going to start thinking about too hard and put on my procurement glasses, which are data driven. I have intention of doing business with a diverse group of businesses. How I fill in diverse is up to my organization to define, unless I'm compliant based, right? But I'm going to be able to identify that. And I'm going to take the right actions. I'm going to go out and I'm going to find the right suppliers. I'm going to identify them. I'm going to vet them before I have a sole proprietor sit down and respond to a 6-hour RFP. I'm going to vet them. I'm going to actually have a conversation, right? Are they suitable for this? Can they manage this? If they can't, do they have a partner to be able to support that, right? So one of the things between you and I, Andrea, right? We've been able to kind of partner some of our training so that we don't have the burden of being, you know, we're sole practitioners that need good partnerships to build out good programs. But again, procurement. Supplier diversity starts and ends with procurement. So I just wanted to make sure that I drive that one home. When you
yeah. I just want to mention, you know, I think that's a bit of the difference between the US and Europe, where DEI internally in companies it's not, you know, especially, for example, if we look at Switzerland, we don't have any quotas to have 50-50 men, women, whatever, no matter which underrepresented group. So it's a recommendation, but obviously that takes time. So and I think, you know, there are advantages and disadvantages having that, because you can always find an excuse why you wouldn't choose a woman over a man. But on the other hand, it's also, I didn't get this job just because, right? And it's the same with supplier diversity. You don't want to win business just because you're a women-owned business. Just taking women as an example of an underrepresented group here. And I had lots and lots of conversations with women who have their own business. And I said, you know, why don't you sign up to We Connect International and, you know, get into their database? Because there are so many corporates who are looking for diverse owned businesses to collaborate with. And they're like, no, I don't want to flag myself. So it's kind of the other way around, where companies don't really want to stand out and say, I'm you know, diverse owned, and also for sure not getting business because, right? But I think what you're saying is also very important, that it's also making sure that wherever you include diverse businesses to work with you as a corporate, as a big company, that you have a fit, and you don't, you know, send out an RFP which might cover all of Europe to a one woman, one man show business. It is possible, but I would check first, and again, they could work with partners like we partner, but also trying to understand that not every business which is small wants to grow to a multi-million-dollar company. So also taking this into consideration, like, okay, you can cover Germany, for example, then let's look for us as a corporate for other companies that can cover other countries, or for me as a diverse business, I look for partners which can cover everything else. It's not that I plan to grow to cover all of EMEA or all of Europe. So I think that's also one of the differences.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point. Which I think I'd love to kind of bring us back to. I'm going to make some guesses. I don't think that we have any questions. So please, if you have some questions for us, throw them in the chat. But I think if I were attending today and I'm going to make this up, a CPO of an international business where I have a supplier diversity program that's been running at, you know, I don't know, 6.5%. So I've exceeded my compliance base. I have a 5% compliance with a particular customer. So I've been sitting at 6.5%. And now all of a sudden the conversation comes back to, okay, Lisa, it's time. we got to bring this across the pond, right? What in the world do I do, Andrea? Right? Like how do I think about, right? I have all my proper reporting, right? I have my spend analysis. It goes through, you know, one of the many platforms, right? And I have my spend is broken down by category. I see my spend broken down by the diverse certifications, right? And I feel like I'm good, right? I've done my job. And now there's a little twist to my world. So if you can help me out, Andrea, I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm going to call you, CPO. What do I do today?
Right. Well, I think, very important is to do some kind of baselining to understand where are you at to define where do you want to go. And for that, the first challenge already starts because you cannot just send out a questionnaire to all your suppliers asking, hey, are you LGBT or are you, do you have a disability, whatever that doesn't work in Europe. So you would get into trouble starting there. But obviously, baselining to understand some kind of base is needed. And also it's important to not trying to boil the ocean. So start small, understand what you just said. You have your spend reports and everything. So understand what you buy and where, and then look at the diverse businesses or organizations that have a database of diverse businesses in these areas. And then also, that needs to match, because it doesn't help if you have a huge spend, for example, in Hungary, but there is a very few amount of organizations and agencies which have an understanding of what are the diverse owned businesses in country. On the other side, that's my answer to your question. Yeah. And I think it's really, that's where it starts. It's not just a copy paste. You cannot just say, well, let's throw it out there. Let's do, rule of one, whatever, include a diverse business for all our RFPs. Many companies have that, and the impact that they can achieve or the needle that they can move with that is not really a big, impact from my point of view, because it's different landscape.
We have a great, can I interrupt you? Because we have a great question that I think is going to help move this. So thank you, Sweta Patel. Generally, to take your company's supplier diversity program, well established in the US, to a global level, where to start. Our management wants to start with the UK. So specifically, please give some insight for UK deployment starting point as well. Great question.
I think going back to what you said, right? Having a spend report, understanding what do you buy in the UK, if you want to start there, what kind of suppliers you already work with, start with the baselining, try to figure out what are the diverse businesses already in your supply chain, to then define what are your goals, where do you want to go. Also the definitions for diverse businesses, it's not so as I said, there is no legislation, so you can, define as a corporate that you want to include maybe women-led companies as well, and not just women-owned and controlled to a majority, or from other underrepresented groups, the same thing, and also the 50-50, what we discussed before, and social enterprises, and this and that. So it's really defining also which diverse businesses or diverse definitions for your social sourcing, however you want to call it.
Yep.
You want to put into your policies. And then, as I said, communication training, it's all about that, because people need to be aware of what you do otherwise.
Yeah, and I just want to point out that Sweta, this is the UK is a great first place to move into Europe, right? Because there are a significant number of offerings that come out of the UK. And significant, of course, I'm not saying in line with what the US is offering, but to Andrea's point, none of it will be a one-for-one, which, I know that there has been, I've heard some rumblings over the years that companies are looking, well, I want one report. Well, that has to be a part A and a part B.
Database.
One database, right? It's hard pressed to get that we're going to see that too soon. And again, it comes back to, you know, if you're going to have a woman certified business in the United States, we are very clear. By that sentence, I have very clearly said things. I've said this is a 51% ownership, women-owned business. It has been vetted in this particular manner. These are the functions that happened in order for that certification to happen. And here is the review process, right? So it's very clearly defined. Where I think it is both exciting and I'm kind of glad I'm not in Europe today and I have Andrea to turn to, right? Is that it leaves, there's enough fluency to the definition that, you know, I'm a big proponent of a steering committee, of bringing together people. And when I think of steering committees, I think fully, you know, not fully represented by the procurement team, but major players from the procurement team have a seat at the table. Marketing should have a seat at the table, right? Because if you're initiating a diversity program, you're going to have a wonderful story to tell. And you want to make sure that that there is a journal who is witnessing this, or a journalist who's witnessing this through the process. You also want to have some senior leadership, somebody who's championing this, because, and this is really coming back to this fluidity situation. Somebody in the process needs to make definitions. They need to be able to define the expectations before you begin, right? There's nothing worse than we've begun and now we're changing. We've changed our mind. You can always change your mind. Much easier when you have a well thought out process, right? And that I think is one of the points to fips, at least, right? Is we're gonna, you know, we bring fips in and we sit down and we have conversations about, well, I think I want this, and it takes somebody with the experience and knowledge to keep driving that question and saying, yeah, but have you thought of? Right? Yeah, but are we heading down a path where you're not going to be able to kind of come back from that one, right? Or yeah, but are we building out a communication plans, right? So, you know, I guess I'm promoting fips right in that one too. Congratulations, Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you.
But I want to drive the point that if you are a US-based diversity practitioner, you're not given any fluidity to what the rules are. The rules are the rules are the rules. They've been established, they're not changing, and they're defined. And when we think about Europe, and I believe, and we're seeing the trend, right? The trend is we're seeing it with sustainability. And each time something happens with, that's what ESG does, right? Each time we see any movement in any of the letters, they pull the other letter up around it, right? So, you know, the S, the social, has been happening for some time. We're seeing the environmental kind of coming in at full charge. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's this major push again around supplier diversity. And I am seeing here, at least here in the United States, I'm seeing this not more than compliance-based initiative. How do we think about friendly shoring? How do we think about doing business with suppliers in nations that I don't know who we is, but we have defined as the nations that we're looking to do business with, and not the nations that we're not looking to do business with, right? Whatever that is or isn't. And I think this is where these programs start. This is where the oversight and the insight into supply chain, it initiates here, right? This is where we get to define the strategy and the rules around who, how, and what we're doing business with.
Right.
So, you know, I bring this back with that fluidity to you, Andrea, and, you know, it's, I guess maybe if you could, top of head, you know, for Sweta Patel, can you just give a couple of, here's how I would think about it and here's how I would initiate it.
Yeah, as I said, I would look at what do you buy in the UK? You know, where are your sourcing teams? Are these just the global, you know, big corporates that you engage with in the UK? Then you might have to think about a different strategy or implementing tier 2 instead. And then, you know, looking at the different organizations. You can listen into my podcast. I had most of them as guests in my podcast where they talked about their organization, what they do. Also, I have a 1-minute reading series on my website where you see, you know, these are the organizations in Europe. This is what kind of a first step. What is supplier diversity? What can you do to start? And it's really about, as I said, understanding what's your baseline. Once you defined where you want to start, maybe it's just one category that you want to start with, and then and go from there. Also, what are the opportunities that are coming up? Are there actually opportunities where diverse businesses can be invited for and have a real chance to win? That's the other point. So this is where I would start. As I said, I would really start small. But making sure, like Lisa said, communication, marketing is key, because you might have people buying for the UK in another country, and they also need to understand what's the UK's culture, what's the UK's landscape, and not just and not just a country where they sit in. So that's also another challenge, which I mentioned before, that a lot of corporates have sourcing teams somewhere, you know, sitting somewhere close together, and they might buy for all of Europe, but they don't have the understanding of the different cultures in the different countries and the different challenges sometimes where it's needed if you want to run successfully supplier diversity, or, as I said, social sourcing, procurement with purpose, however you want to call it, but creating impact and moving the needle to more equality and equity in the world.
That was terrific. I think that was thorough. Thank you for that.
I also wanted to mention one thing, Lisa, which I think is also something we need to keep in our minds for the future, is AI, right? With AI, you can find so much information. You can really, maybe, you know, we get to a point where we no longer need the different organizations and agencies to get access to the diverse owned businesses, because they're available through AI, because there's so much public information also with commercial registers and so on. So that's also something we need to keep in our minds. Also for the organizations and agencies, how are they going to deal with that? Yeah, so that's just one thing I also wanted to mention, which is, it's very exciting and interesting, but I think also something we need to keep in mind.
I absolutely agree with you. And I love that you just threw that in. I think that one has so much more we could talk about, right? Because as soon as you say AI making these decisions, one of the things that I talk a lot with clients about is, especially now I'm going to get compliance based, and especially around if they're reporting to government, or if they are government, right? You don't want to back yourselves in so that you're a vetting agency. You don't want to make it's one thing to kind of buy into, if you say we're going to accept self-certifications, that's absolutely fine. I have clients who say we're going to accept self-certifications on these 7 categories or these qualities. But if it gets too critical, if it gets too too expensive, whatever they've identified, we don't want self-certification around this. Okay, that's a reasonable thing to look at, right? And how are you doing that? Are you considering fraud? Are you accepting fraud? That's up to the organization. But one of the things that I want to always say is there are enough agents, we have enough certifying agencies, right? And we have enough government oversight that can deliver this information to you. And there are enough platforms, you know, i.e. Tealbook and Proximo and Supplier.io, right, who are out there in the world to be able to assist and supply that information utilizing AI, right? I'm just weary. That's all. I'm not an AI weary person, but I'm weary that we kind of end on that without saying, I love what Andrea said about considering AI in our future. I just don't think that future's today. Don't base your
No.
supply diversity programs on it today.
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's a lot of things that could be better, right? I mean, you can also, I think in the US you have many more options to actually flag your business profile in Google.
That's right.
As ethnic minority owned. Here we can flag our business as female owned. I think there is currently just the option to say LGBT plus friendly. So it doesn't say owned, but yeah, I mean, these are all the things which is kind of public information if you yourself identify yourself as such in when you create your business profile. But also, as I said, on commercial registers, Money House in the UK, also to Sweta, you might want to check some of the suppliers with Money House, which provides you information about the ownership of a company. And yeah, that's all public information. So something to keep in mind. And what I also wanted to mention in regards to ESG and you know, sustainability really in everybody's agenda right now is that including diverse businesses or social businesses in your supply chain is not just supporting the social pillar of ESG, but also, you know, governance, because if you live diversity and inclusion or equity also in your supply chain, it has impact on your board, it has impact on your employees, and also for the environmental, as I said, usually small and medium-sized businesses, so it's closer, more local, more regional, less CO2 for transport and everything. So
yes,
I don't see why not.
So it looks like Kathy is saying thank you to everybody. Kathy, do you want to come in and give the final words?
I just want to thank you both for a fantastic presentation, and really, you really did dive into this topic. Fantastic. And thank you for those that had questions and put them in the chat. And at this point, you know, we're going to close out the program. But Andrea, did you want to mention something?
Yeah. We wanted to mention that we will collaborate and provide supplier diversity in 7 weeks training session. It's a package. Lisa and I will provide the trainings, and it will be announced very soon. So hopefully also through your channel, Katie, but for sure through our channels on LinkedIn and also Lisa's LinkedIn and on our website. So keep an eye out.
Terrific.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everybody.